Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chorus One podcast. My name is Yannick, and I lead the ventures team here at Chorus One, and we'll be hosting today's episode. EigenLayer recently went live on mainnet with delegations being enabled and LRT Restaking caps having been lifted. And on top of all of that, the team are now launching the Eigen token with some very unique design choices. So now I'm super excited to have EigenLayer's founder Sreeram join us today on this episode to unpack restaking, talk us through the next chapter for EigenLayer, AVSs, the Eigen token, and all the other exciting developments in the EigenLayer ecosystem. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sreeram.
Thank you so much, Yannick. We've had great interactions with Chorus One over time, and really a pleasure to be here to talk to you about this.
Amazing. So to kick things off, I think you don't really need an introduction at this point anymore. Maybe you can still give us a super quick intro about yourself and kind of take us back to how EigenLayer got started before we jump into the deep end.
Yeah, I was a associate professor here at the University of Washington, Seattle, where I ran the UW Blockchain Research Lab, where we designed a whole bunch of infrastructure protocols for how to build and scale decentralized systems. One of the bottlenecks we continuously faced was whenever you have a protocol which cannot be simply expressed as a smart contract. If it can be easily expressed as a smart contract, you have a massive degree of open innovation. Anybody, anywhere in the world can actually just write a contract, and you don't need to know who they are, trust them, or anything, because the blockchain brings trust to them, and they can just put their contract on top. But when you're building a core new decentralized consensus protocol, how the nodes talk to each other, how the peer-to-peer network works, how the consensus happens, how data is distributed across it, all of these kinds of things, you cannot go and program that on top of Ethereum, because that's not the level of programmability of any blockchain. So the thing that we found as a major bottleneck was innovators who were coming up with these new protocols, even building systems, could not get to bootstrap. So the only way that they could start a new to take their consensus protocol to reality is to actually build a whole new layer one protocol by themselves, which means getting a new community on board, getting stakers all around the world, getting node operators all around the world. The stake has to be economically worth it to actually people to trust the system. This was such a high bar, and very, very few people actually who are innovating at the technology layer will also do all these other things. And it's a kind of like a 100x coincidence to find a person. And that's why like a Solana or an Avalanche is a rare event. It's not a normal event. So how do we actually if deploying any decentralized protocol can be as simple as deploying a smart contract, then the world would be very different. Then as an innovator, so when you're writing a program for like a web application, just write the code and send it to the cloud. The cloud will manage everything. What is the analogous thing for that in crypto was kind of like the driving question. What can I just write? A protocol is also just code. Just write a code and send it to it. Let the nodes show up. Let the different stake shows up, and then they actually contribute to the work. And then because they contribute to the work, they earn a portion of the reward. So this seems like a much better, much more open innovation for protocol builders. So that was kind of the transition. I was building protocols as an academic, even building systems that express these protocols, but could not get it to be used anywhere because there's a lot of friction. Get it, either Bitcoin or Ethereum to adopt your protocol is a very high bar, and very rarely the protocol changes. So that's one of the reasons why we started Eigen in German for your own. So it's your own layer. Anybody can come and build whatever they want on top of it. So that's what it's designed to evoke.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I am German, so that's the one reference that I did get. So that's fantastic. And just before we dive into all the design choices and everything, how's the transition been from kind of doing this on the more academic level to now being an operator in this sometimes crazy and very fast moving crypto ecosystem?
The set of things I do, things like this, where I interact with people and explain various aspects of the protocol. I designed the protocol. I had to build a company around it, which was kind of like a whole new thing I had to learn. But one of the kind of powerful things I learned is you don't have to know everything about any of these things. You just need to find the right people who know that thing, and then make sure that they take care of those things. So that's how we build a company. And then building a community, which is a whole other thing that you have to do to build a crypto protocol, is another crazy dimension that we've had to learn through trial and error and mistakes and corrections. So that's the process. But overall, I would say I'm really enjoying the process. It is
Amazing.
hard. It is hard, but it is very rewarding because as an academic, I was an innovator, try to create new ideas. And one of my, I view this as a natural transitions to build a platform for anybody around the world can come and express their innovation. I think that's the driving motivation.
Got it. No, that's fantastic to hear. Cool. Then diving into EigenLayer, what are kind of the benefits for stakers to restake ETH? Why should people care about this layer of kind of programmable trust? And what does it even mean to be a coordination layer for programmable trust? Maybe you can kind of walk us through that process and your thoughts around that.
Yeah. So if you look at what is crypto and what is non-crypto, the dividing line, or what is blockchain, what is not blockchain, dividing line is decentralized trust. So if you add decentralized trust to something, it becomes a blockchain thing. If you remove decentralized trust to it, it becomes a non-blockchain thing. So that's the dividing line. And so if that's the dividing line, then supplying decentralized trust, which is what really EigenLayer does. If you think of it, an innovator has an idea for how to build a decentralized protocol. If there was something that supplied decentralized trust to it, these two things can merge and then become a powerful phenomenon. And so now you ask, where does decentralized trust come from and how do I make it more programmable? That's the idea of programmable decentralized trust or programmable trust. So where does decentralized trust come from? Decentralized trust in Ethereum comes from staking. Somebody takes their ETH, puts it into a deposit and then says, hey, I'm going to run the Ethereum nodes correctly. If I run the Ethereum nodes correctly, I'll gain rewards. If I try to attack the system, I will lose not only my rewards, but also the deposit potentially. So that's the basic trade of staking is you put your ETH up and then say, I've run the Ethereum network. I'm going to run it correctly. If I run it correctly, I gain rewards. If I don't run it correctly, the protocol will penalize me by taking my ETH away. So that is the root of decentralized trust. That's why we trust Ethereum works correctly and the ledger gets updated correctly and so on. So if you ask, how do I take this root of decentralized trust and supply it to other people, anybody who wants to build a protocol, so that it's not just the Ethereum node that they're running other software. And the core thing that you want to do is to say that, hey, can I take my ETH and make a promise, not only that I'll run the Ethereum protocol correctly, but also that I run all these ABCD protocols correctly. ABCD are different protocols built on EigenLayer. Then you're extending that trust to, hey, now I'm not only running this protocol correctly, but all these protocols correctly. And I gain rewards from all these protocols. But also, if I behave maliciously on any one of these protocols, I may lose my ETH. So that's the trade of restaking. You can think of, restaking is one particular way of thinking about it. Programmable staking is another way of thinking about it, because if you just think of Ethereum itself, running the Ethereum protocol correctly, there are many different kind of slashing condition. Node go offline for some time is one kind of slashing condition. You sign two different blocks at the same height, that's a different kind of slashing condition, and so on. Inside the Ethereum protocol, there are many slashing conditions, and running Ethereum node correctly means getting all of those things correct. In the same way, what it does is programmable staking expands the scope of conditions that you're opting into. It says, not only these conditions, but also these other conditions. And so that's the broader bundle of things that you're promising. So now, why would a staker want to do this? Because they are taking additional risk by saying that if they run any of these other protocols wrong, they can lose their ETH. They would do it because they're getting rewards from these other protocols. So how do those protocols give rewards? So what are the type of protocols you're talking about? Think of file storage. Filecoin was a file storage network, right? It had to be a whole separate network. They were actually very friendly with Ethereum. They, in fact, in the first, I think, ETH Denver, they proposed that, hey, Filecoin can be built as potentially a smart contract. And then they realized it doesn't have the programmability to build Filecoin inside Ethereum. So you have to go build a whole other separate network for data storage. Now, with EigenLayer, you could build a data storage network on ETH staking on EigenLayer. So that's a really interesting thing. You could build we ourselves are building a data availability network. That's an example of, you want to build an oracle which fetches data from the internet. These are the kinds of protocols, and each protocol has a reward structure for stakers. Right? They could say, oh, every time that somebody asks for a data storage, I'll give a portion of the fees to the stakers. One kind of a model. Another kind of a model where these services, we call them AVS, actively validated services. Actively validated means like somebody has to actually do the job of running and maintaining these services. So these actively validated services could give you rewards from the fees that they are receiving, or they could themselves have their own token economy and give a portion of their tokens to the stakers. Those would be the two kinds of rewards that stakers get.
Got it. No, that's a great explanation, and actually, you make it easy for me. You already kind of had the next two questions that I had in mind. You already kind of answered very, very naturally in that. I guess the perks of having lectured before. No, this is super interesting. And so when it comes to these AVSs, right? You already mentioned like a few different use cases that are quite interesting. For us as node operators, it's all about kind of economics in the end as well. And as you mentioned in your introduction as well, right, it's very hard for protocols to bootstrap kind of your whole economy with like a validator set and so on. But then on the flip side of that, for us validators, it's also a lot of resources that we need to put into supporting a protocol, upgrades, running the infrastructure, having 24/7 monitoring, on-call people, et cetera, right? And so for us, kind of looking at the AVS economy on EigenLayer, it's been very interesting to see like the different types that exist, and also that there's different complexity with each one. And so another question that I had was around that complexity. Do you think this is something that potentially creates centralization pressures, because maybe not every validator or node operator that is doesn't have the scope or resources of a Chorus One or similar node operators can support many AVSs because of that complexity?
Yeah, it's a great question. The different AVSs are looking for different kinds of promises. For example, one AVS may say, hey, I'm running a bridge and my weekly transaction volume is $100 million. And as long as I have like, $200 million or more or whatever staked just for myself, and I'm pretty safe because nobody's going to attack the bridge. Now, to this bridge, it doesn't really matter whether like it is coming from a handful of node operators or coming from thousands of node operators, because it's just making a promise that the bridge transactions are correct, and then you put it in, and the bridge continues to work. On the other side, there are AVSs which very much need decentralized trust. These are things for which you cannot slash for misbehaviors easily. And a simple example I like to give is secret sharing. I take a file which I want to keep it as a secret. Then I split it into small portions and then let each node store a portion of the data. Now, if all of these were just like controlled by two entities, and they just release their portions, then the secret is lost, right? So for secret sharing, I need the node operators to be highly decentralized. So the way we envision, and these things take time to emerge, is the way we envision is things that require decentralized trust more will pay for more distinct nodes. Not necessarily ask for a more centralized operator set. But there are many things that just require a lot of compute power, professional activity, and like 99.9% SLA and all this kind of stuff. Those will be fine with like having a smaller group of nodes, which are actually highly effective. Another way of thinking about it is, since we are building the first marketplace for raw decentralized trust, decentralized trust comes from both the economics, but also from decentralization itself. And so because we're building this for the first time, we have to create the grades of decentralized. What are the different dimensions of decentralized trust? And how do you evaluate and recruit node operators over time across the spectrum? It's kind of like the first commodities market for potato or wheat or rice. The first time you build it, you have to be like, oh, the short grain rice versus long grain rice. And like you have to grade it. And then that's how you create a commodities market. And so that's roughly what I think we need to do as a kind of protocol and an ecosystem, is to encourage these kind of dimensions to be solicited in the market. So yes, some of the nodes are going to be highly centralized, but we are also envisioning more decentralized nodes coming up because there is an incentive specifically to decentralize. So
yeah, no, that's super interesting, and I mean, going back to like the programmability of things, right? If you can be flexible and can kind of create a set of operators that works well for whatever you're trying to do, I think that's quite powerful. And also quite interesting for us, I think, with other shared security models where there wasn't this like opt-in, but it's kind of just forced. You removed a lot of this flexibility of like finding a set and a basket that works for you. And so when it comes to kind of the synergy between kind of AVSs and node operators, the other side of this is kind of users selecting node operators they restake with. And so I know from our side, but would be keen to understand how you think about, or what you would kind of recommend users to kind of go through when selecting operators. What factors should you consider in this decision-making process, and kind of what are maybe some risks that you have with some operators. How are you guys thinking about that?
Oh, this is a really important question. So I mentioned earlier that when you stake, the way trust is being supplied is when you stake, the AVS, the service, knows that you're doing the right thing, because if you don't do the right thing, you can be slashed. And slashing means basically you could lose a portion of your ETH. That's what slashing is. And without this, you don't transfer trust tightly. Right now, on mainnet, to be clear, we don't have slashing, right? Which means trust is not transferred very tightly. So it is an important assumption to state clearly. Because stakers opt into operators run nodes, and the nodes run the service. But what if they don't run the service correctly, or they try to attack the service, or whatever things happen? The way you know that trust is transferred correctly is that if you don't do the right thing, you're going to be penalized. So that's why everybody's going to behave correctly. And that is not when slashing goes live, which it will in the coming, let's say, 6 months. At that point, you have a very tight relationship, because when you stake to an operator and an operator chooses a bunch of AVSs, you have this thing that you're actually taking a concrete risk. You want to choose an operator. What kind of an operator do you want to choose? You want to choose an operator who's not going to attack the system, who's highly trustworthy, who, there are many ways in which people, or operators become trustworthy. One way is reputation and previous experience, and you can see what else they've done before. Another way is, an operator may run a trusted execution environment and say that it's run inside this hardware enclave, and therefore I'm trustworthy. So you don't need to know who I am, but I'm guaranteeing that I can only run inside the kind of Intel hardware encryption box. So that's another way to become trustworthy. So there are many ways. Somebody may have a legal contract with Chorus One, and that is one way that you become trustworthy. So the relationship between staker and operator is not guaranteed by the EigenLayer protocol. How the staker's money can never be touched by the operator, but the slashing risk that you're, as a staker, when you're delegating to an operator, you're actually taking real risk. If the operator doesn't behave correctly, then you may lose your stake. So you have to make sure, as a staker, when choosing an operator, you have to make sure that you're choosing trustworthy operators, because trust is not guaranteed. That any operator listed on the EigenLayer website is not necessarily like a trustworthy operator. And the protocol is designed to work only when everybody feels this risk. As a staker, you have to feel the risk that, hey, I'm delegating to an operator, and that's when the right operators get selected. It's very important because that's how the protocol works. The protocol assumes that I don't know who the staker and operator are. They've just made some relationship between each other. We just give a way for expressing that relationship in the protocol. And this relationship is not a financial custody relationship, because the stake is sitting in the EigenLayer protocol, but it is a relationship of which service provider do you trust. It's kind of like, you're JP Morgan and you want to run your banking accounts. Like you're trusting a service like Amazon or somebody to run your computers for you, and they need to be trustworthy. So it's the same type of relationship that we're envisioning between stakers and operators. And so delegate to trustworthy operators so that you will not get slashed. And right now, the economy is a little bit broken because slashing is not live. So this perception of risk, the signal, has not propagated through the ecosystem correctly. But as we will start putting up more information about how slashing works, how to choose node operators when slashing goes live, all of this will hopefully guide user behavior in the right direction.
Yeah, that's great. Because from our end as well, you see, there's a lot of AVSs now on mainnet, like more and more are launching, and they reach out to us, and if I assume a lot of the known node operators to onboard them, as operators in the EigenLayer ecosystem. And so we've been starting. So as node operators, one of our key jobs in general is figuring out which protocols to run. And so we go through, our internal processes there, look at economics, look at risk, look at the tech stack and do the tech due diligence to see, how complex is this protocol to run? Are there any other risks, running this protocol in our infrastructure, because we do run multiple protocols. And so we've actually just also released a guide on how we think about kind of selecting our AVSs and which AVSs we onboard, going through kind of code quality, the known team and kind of different, I would say, like factors that we include in our analysis. And as you mentioned already, slashing is obviously not live, but we still try to make a kind of educated, kind of guess and educated just decision on, protocols and AVSs that are run well, that are developed well, that, kind of have a certain standard, are open source, so we can, review the source code and all these things. So it's great to hear that slashing is coming, because, as you said, it's like a very important part of the kind of ecosystem, and, to keep things balanced. So before diving into, more of the risk around AVSs, and then also how, the token potentially can help in the system, I wanted to ask, what type of AVSs you think, will be using EigenLayer, or differently, what new types of AVSs you think are coming, or are you excited about, or EigenLayer maybe enables that wasn't as easily done before?
Yeah, great question. The the word or the term AVS, actively validated service, we're not calling it actively validated chains. This is for a reason. We think chain is one kind of a service, which is an ordered ledger. So you have an ordering of all the transactions, and then you have a ledger. And we think there will be a lot of services which are not chains. They're just a service. Just what is an example of a service? Imagine I'm sitting on Ethereum and I'm making a call to I want to run an AI which updates my DeFi prices based on the history of all the previous transactions. Run an AI algorithm on all the history of all the transactions on chain, and then says, oh, I'm going to charge 1% take rate or 0.1% take rate based on not only my own Uniswap transactions, but also maybe Sushi Swaps transactions, because both of them are on chain. But this AI protocol cannot run on chain itself. So I need to have a co-processor, an additional service, which is not run on Ethereum itself, but you call it, and then it goes and runs on all this computation and then gives me an answer. But this answer needs to come with some kind of an integrity, that it's run correctly. And one way of getting integrity is that staking supplies integrity. I stake some amount of money that this answer is actually correct, and then send that answer back to Ethereum. So this is a co-processor. And as you can see, the co-processor is not a chain. Ethereum is the chain. The co-processor is just a service that brings back an answer into the chain. And you can think of this AI co-processor being called not only by Ethereum, but in Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, some layer 2s, some other chains, and so on. So actively validated services, we think a lot about what are the category of services that can accompany a chain, rather than, of course, you can also build L1 type chains on top of EigenLayer. Yeah. So this is another, I think, a major difference between other paradigms of shared security that existed before and the EigenLayer worldview. The EigenLayer worldview is there are lots of services, and you call the right service inside your chain, rather than each thing is its own chain, and then now you go to different chains to do different things. So this is a very important kind of paradigm that we operate with. What are examples of these co-processors? I mentioned AI, running an AI inference and then giving you an answer as an example. And we have protocols like Ritual coming up, which are AI co-processors. There are another example would be to run a SQL database. I want to run a database and then I need to do a query. But Ethereum doesn't support SQL queries. But if there is a co-processor which runs SQL queries and gives me answers with computational reliability, we have OpenDB, some new upcoming partnerships coming up, which basically build these kinds of database queries. You can think of, I want to run a Linux program on top of Ethereum. I want to run just like a Linux box. Can I do it? And so that's another category of co-processors, Linux or RISC-V co-processors. You can think of, I want to run encrypted computation, right? I'm sitting there and I want to do a computation, but computation is not done on plain text, but on encrypted data, so that the output is also an encrypted data. And then the right person, whoever they want, they can decrypt it. Very, very amazing new cryptographic primitives. We have two protocols building on us, INCO and Phoenix, which are encrypted computation called FHE, fully homomorphic encryption. We have protocols which do multi-party computation. I mentioned this thing where you take a secret and split it among multiple parties. Not only they can hold portions of the secret, they can do computations on top of portions of secrets. So that's another crazy primitive. So a lot of these things that just completely unlock new kinds of actions on blockchains, which simply didn't exist before. Those are the kinds of ones we are kind of most excited about. There is also, I think, another major category, which is roll-up services. When you're thinking of running a roll-up, there are lots of dimensions of trust in a roll-up. Oh, there's a centralized sequencer. Can you have a decentralized sequencer? Where do you publish data? Can you have a data availability system? How do you bridge from one rollup to another rollup fast before settlement? Can you have a super fast bridging for rollups? All these kinds of auxiliary services for rollups go on EigenLayer. So EigenLayer itself is not a layer 2 or doesn't compete with any layer 2s. It's a system of auxiliary services that enhances the Ethereum ecosystem, both the Ethereum L1 chain, but also all the other layer 2s.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I also like your Filecoin example that you shared at the very beginning. That's I hadn't thought about that one, and that's actually quite an interesting use case as well. So we already talked a little bit about kind of also the risks that AVS is kind of can have, given that it's a permissionless system, right? You can have all kinds of different qualities, and we've seen that as well. That there's definitely different types of standards in kind of coding and in AVS quality as well. And there's also been a lot of talk about if you have a lot of these AVSs and you reuse the security of Ethereum to secure those services, that this can potentially lead to some not so nice effects for Ethereum and the Ethereum consensus. So there's been a lot of talk about not overloading the Ethereum consensus via restaking and slashing. And so talking about the Eigen token, you recently published a white paper with a token model that actually addresses some of those concerns through its kind of unique design. So I'd love it if you could walk us through the token design on a high level, especially highlighting also the difference between kind of objective and intersubjective attributable faults, and also with regards to kind of Ethereum consensus and how you're thinking about that.
Yeah. The first point on when you have multiple AVSs sharing a common pool of security, imagine there is a $10 billion pool of security and there are 100 AVSs on top. And each of them think they have $10 billion of security and they transact $10 billion of volume, let's say. Then there is a big problem because the total system is now transacting 100 times 10 billion, $1 trillion of volume. But the protection or economic security is only $10 billion. So the economic security is much smaller than the transaction value that is going around. So that was the system at risk. How do we make sure that security is more attributable to each AVS. So we have this principle and phenomenon we call attributable security, which is coming up. And attributable security says, hey, yes, there is this $10 billion pool that stakers and operators are participating in. And let's just imagine an idealized world where everybody stakes into everything, which is the most leveraged, right? Because everybody's participating in everything. Even in that world, what the EigenLayer protocol can do is to say that, hey, there's totally $10 billion at stake, and there are these 100 applications. And can I give a portion of this $10 billion as an attribution to each one of these AVSs? What it means to give as an attribution is that if that AVS tries to slash, they can actually slash and redistribute that portion of their security, no matter what else is happening in the system. Other AVSs may trigger slashing simultaneously. Something else may go wrong, but you can still slash and redistribute your portion of stake. So this is called attributable security. This is a feature that we're building. This is complex to maintain. Why? Because different stakers may have opted into different subsets of AVSs, and some random group of stakers may collude and attack a random group of AVSs. And whatever happens, the protocol should guarantee that each AVS should get their portion of attributable security solidly. So this is very important. This is the UX. This makes it very simple for an AVS to think about what is the measurable portion of security am I getting? And this is in addition to pooled security. Why am I saying it's in addition to pooled security? It's because imagine $10 billion is staked, and it's staked into every AVS. Now, to attack any one AVS, I need to capture a majority of the $10 billion of stake. Otherwise, I can't attack any one AVS. But if I do attack the AVS, I know that that AVS does know that there is 100 million or 300 million or whatever the portion of attribution it got. It will be able to redistribute that portion. So you're getting both the benefit of pooling and the benefit of attribution in a common system. So that's how we solve the leverage problem, so to say. Because if everybody thinks, oh, I have the full pool of security, then it doesn't make sense. This is not only a matter of the AVSs kind of getting a sharper guarantee, but because they get a sharper guarantee, they're willing to pay more for it. Okay, so this is another thing that is going around on Twitter. For example, people are saying, oh, when more than a certain amount of security, maybe more than 1 billion, nobody wants that much security, so nobody is going to pay more for it. But that's only true if you only perceive pooled security. But once you bring in attribution, you say, any one protocol may not need more than 1 billion. There are hundreds of protocols, each of which may need 1 billion.
Yeah.
And that adds up to being able to sustain and pay for a larger pool of security. So that's the kind of basic thing that I think the paradigm of attributable security solves a basic problem for the AVS in knowing how much security that they are getting, but also therefore solves the ability for the system to be able to extract an amount of payment proportional to the security that they want, rather than, everybody's just there's a tragedy of commons in a pool. Everybody says, already there's 10 billion. Why should I pay any more? So that's where we are today, right? So, Yannick, we talked a little bit about how in the absence of slashing, there are some misalignments in the system.
Yeah.
And there's also a misalignment on payment, because now you're it's $15 billion pool. What does it cost you to run my node? I'll just pay you a little bit for that. But that'll also get turned once you have attribution and attributable security. So our principle of deployment has been always, incremental. So even our own TVL, for example, we had many, many series of upgrades and said okay, now we can take a little bit more, and that's how we've come to this far. So that's our principle, incremental deployment. So we deployed on mainnet, stakers, operator, AVS, EigenDA, all of it is live. But payments and slashing, the key economic signals that mediate the system are not at live. So that's coming up in the next 3 months and 6 months.
Got it. Yeah, that's also made it for us as node operators, as I mentioned, harder on the AVS side, because usually you have this economic component, right? The inflation rate of a protocol, so kind of how much security budget they have. And you currently don't have that. So that's why I mentioned as well, like right now we can only go by our technical due diligence and try to measure the risk there. So yeah, it's super exciting that that's all coming up. And so with regards to kind of how you, sorry, go ahead.
So you asked also about the Eigen token. So I can switch into that or answer any questions on this one before that.
No, sounds good. So I was just about to ask basically how kind of you try to solve for this attributable security that you mentioned when there is kind of a slashing event or something like that happening. How do you kind of use the token design to not overload Ethereum, basically?
Yeah. So when you think about attributability, right, which is you should be able to find the set of stakers that behaved maliciously and identify them, as in the blockchain. And how does the Ethereum blockchain know who created a fault? So usually what the AVS does is to write a slashing contract and just says, hey, if ABCD happens, then they'll lose their stake. So that's a slashing contract on Ethereum. And these conditions have to be verifiable on Ethereum. That's all the things that you can represent on Ethereum. The problem is some conditions are not expressible on Ethereum. And let's say an example is there is an oracle, and the oracle's goal is to bring a price feed of how much does one BTC equal. Is it 1 USD or 1,000 USD? So that oracle, when it reports the answers back to Ethereum, let's say it says 1 BTC is equal to $1, which we know as of the date of this recording is a complete falsehood.
We'd probably be out of a job.
That's absolutely true. So if they say that, why are these operators saying that? They're saying that to attack the system and then to then like break a lending protocol, then to steal some money, whatever. They have some elaborate haste planned. But but the core part of economic security is to prevent it. How do you write a slashing contract that says that if they say the wrong price, they'll be slashed? Because price of BTC to USD may not be transparent from the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
Or who's the president of the United States may not be transparent from the Ethereum blockchain. Or in a data storage protocol I just mentioned, like Filecoin, the nodes are not serving the data to the end users. Is a problem, but cannot be observed on the blockchain, because how do you know that they sent the data or didn't send the data? There's all this category of faults which are not observable from inside the blockchain, but it's perfectly transparent to us from outside the blockchain. You and I, Yannick and I, sitting outside the blockchain can say, oh, 1 BTC is not 1 USD, otherwise we'll be out of a job. But the blockchain itself doesn't know that. Yannick and Sreeram have a job, and therefore 1 BTC is not equal to 1 USD. And that context is lacking, and the Eigen token was designed. So Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation in general was worried that if you try to write these kinds of conditions, the one way to write these conditions on a blockchain is to say some committee will decide whether you're right or wrong. No, you're placing too much trust in that committee, because I stake $15 billion into EigenLayer, and that committee now decides whether that is correct or not is very risky. So what we did is we created the Eigen token as a kind of containerized system to just handle these kinds of intersubjective. We call these intersubjective because it's not a purely subjective opinion. That is my opinion that 1 BTC is 1 USD. It's the market price today that 1 BTC is whatever, 60,000 USD. And that intersubjective, where all of us, it's like social truth, right? Who's the president of the United States is not an objective or mathematical truth. It's a social truth that we all agree, okay, this is the constitution, this is the election process, this is the person who got elected. And whether the data was published or not to the peer-to-peer network is not an objective truth. It's a social truth. Anybody who's in the peer-to-peer network can testify whether that's true or not. And so how do you bring the ability to slash for social truths? So that's what the Eigen token tries to do. And the kind of core idea is by saying that, hey, if you disagree that all the Eigen stakers, they behaved maliciously, there should be a way to fork the token, create a new version of the token where those stakers don't have their Eigen anymore. So this is called forking. And blockchains like Ethereum rely on forking to be secure. Imagine a majority of Ethereum block producers became malicious. What happens? Then are they able to take over Ethereum completely? No. they can produce an invalid block, but nobody will accept the invalid block because all the outside observers, anybody who's running an Ethereum client will say, I reject that block, I reject that block. I'm going to follow the other chain where the blocks are valid. And so that's the same thing that happens with EigenLayer, is that you have the ability to, with the Eigen token, and this is called forking, right? The chain forked. Instead of forking a chain, what the Eigen token does is to fork at the application level inside a chain. So I don't want to fork Ethereum for something bad happening at EigenLayer, but I can fork the application, like just the contract which holds the Eigen token can be forked, and then say that, oh, these guys were bad and their Eigen tokens don't exist anymore, whereas the other token has the value or redistributed. So there's a lot of complex mechanics underneath it, but the high level is what I just said. And who decides which is the right version of the Eigen token? People outside, sitting outside the system, we can say, oh, that Eigen token is the false token because those takers behave badly, and this is the right version of the Eigen token. And so the system has to make sure that this kind of forkability is possible. When you do this forking, somebody holding a token in an exchange doesn't need to be aware that all these things are happening. So we call this isolation. So there is a version of the token which doesn't fork. And you can just use it, and whichever fork is right, you still get a 1 unit of value on that fork. And there's a version of the token which stakers have to be paying attention to, which can fork. And forking itself has to be designed to be rare, because you don't want to every day wake up and say, oh, this is the token or that's the token. So we call this metering, by actually making sure that every time you create a fork, you have to bet some amount of Eigen. And only if you're right, you will be given back that Eigen. If you're wrong, then your Eigen loses value. So these kinds of properties are built into the Eigen token, unlike any other general ERC20 token. And so that's how the Eigen token enables these features of forkability and therefore slashability for faults that are not transparent on the Ethereum chain, but are transparent to people outside the system.
Got it. Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I do appreciate that you guys, take all the feedback that has come, especially early on, from the Ethereum Foundation and other researchers, and found a way to design a system that addresses a lot of these concerns. I think, at least from my view.
Thank you so much, Yannick. Because there are when the Ethereum people were worried about overloading Ethereum consensus, and I think there are 3 kinds of overloading, and we have a solution for all of them. And it's kind of fascinating to see that. So the first one is I'd call computational overloading. In a world where you want to run 1,000 chains, you have to run, every node has to run 1,000 chains. It's kind of insane. So the way we solve that is we built EigenDA as a scalable data system. So what EigenDA does is each node stores a little bit of data, but together they store all the data. And so the system becomes highly scalable because everybody doesn't have to do everything. So that's how we solve computational overloading. Then people were worried about leverage or economic overloading. And economic overloading is everybody thinks they have $10 billion stake. Every AVS thinks that. We solve that with attributable security, which is, and then the third one people were worried about is overloading social consensus, which is, something going to go wrong in EigenLayer and then Ethereum needs to fork. And then we said, no, actually we create a containerization and only Eigen token needs to fork. Ethereum doesn't need to fork. So these are 3 different levels of feedback that we've taken and integrated into the system. These are not exhaustive. There's going to be many more things to learn. But that's our DNA, is to kind of try to understand real problems to build solid solutions for the long term.
Yeah, no, it feels like your kind of academic background is helping on this as well. It's kind of, taking what's currently there and trying, iterating and trying to find new ways to go about things. Well, we always, as node operators, we work with a lot of, institutional clients and, generally people that are very risk averse. On average, I would say. Why should they stake Eigen tokens? Do they get something out of it, or should they just restake their ETH? How does it kind of work together?
Yeah. So, once the different AVSs will decide what staking modalities they accept. So EigenLayer wants to remain a very non-opinionated platform. We don't want to say, oh, we have to always stake ETH, or you have to always stake Eigen or anything like that. these are different things. It's like a Swiss Army knife. Like you just figure out like what things you really need. So that's number one. And when you rely on ETH, you rely on ETH for objectively slashable faults, right? You just say, hey, ETH stakers, if they do like these misbehaviors, they'll be slashed, and you can write the contracts on chain. For objectively slashable faults, ETH staking is very powerful. For not objectively slashable faults, like social truths that we talked about, data withholding or oracle contamination, all these kinds of things, you use eigenstaking. For alignment with your own community, you use your own token staking. Like, you're an AVS and you say, hey, I have an Oracle token and I want my community to participate, because it's a different kind of crypto economics, which is those community users are most incentivized to not lie, because if they lie, their own token value may go up or down. So they take the most exposure to your own token value.
Yeah.
So you can bring all these different modalities together, and our own preference is to use these in separate quorums. So one quorum which is just comprised of ETH stakers, for example, EigenDA is built on dual quorum with additional custom quorums. So I'll explain, this is maybe like a useful thing. So that when you store data on EigenDA, there is a ETH staker quorum, and you have to send the data to the ETH staker quorum. And they have to testify and certify, a majority of them have to testify that the data they have stored it. Similarly, you have to take the same data and dispose it also to the Eigen staker quorum. They have to download and store the data and then give you a certificate saying they have stored the data. Only if you have both of these certificates, then the data is considered dispersed in EigenDA. So this gives you the strength of both the quorums, because if either a majority of this group is right or a majority of that group is right, then your data is solid and available. So this is one way in which you can use dual quorum. And EigenDA is built with this dual quorum of ETH and Eigen. You always uses both ETH and Eigen. But in addition, a rollup can come to EigenDA and say, hey, I want ETH and Eigen, but also I want my own rollup token to participate in validating the data. So now it's triply replicated between ETH, Eigen, and my own token. So this is an example of how to design an AVS which uses ETH, Eigen, and your own token in different combinations.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. We keep coming back to programmability, right? And kind of being able to pick and choose. Do you think there's additional things that AVSs can do on the architecture side to be more secure? Things like distributed validator technology, OBOL or something like that comes to mind. Yeah, would love to hear your thoughts around that. Is there a DVT or other technologies that may be helpful?
Yeah, I think it's both. It could be helpful both at the level of the AVS or at the level of the node operator set. Earlier, I was saying that there are two ways to gain trust on being a node operator. One way is real world trust, reputation. The second way is running a trusted execution environment. A third way is I'm not a single person running it. I myself have 20 people around the world running different nodes, and we take a consensus, and that's how progress is made. This is a huge benefit to the ecosystem in gaining more trust and decentralization. And so how is this going to work? Right now, the thing is, to build DVT for the Ethereum protocol was a pretty complex undertaking, and it took a couple of years for OBOL and SSV to build successful DVT technologies. And for each AVS, this process needs to be replicated, which is going to be a little bit hard. But over time, once we see enough patterns for how AVSs actually work, then that may be a way to abstract it to say that if you do ABCD things, it becomes DVT compliant. And so once it becomes DVT compliant, you just have this modular interface, and then you just can plug and play this. We haven't yet figured it out what that interfaces are, but because we don't know the space of all AVSs, so it's a kind of a chicken and egg problem to begin with. But once we see, here are the first 30, 50 AVSs, out of which these 10 seem to be the most successful, let's find out what's the common pattern there. Maybe they all use a BLS signature, and then all you need is to kind of distribute the BLS signature on a group of nodes. So abstracting out what the technical interface is would make it much more scalable, so you can run arbitrary AVSs using DVT.
Yeah, Yeah, that'd be very cool. Awesome. Then I've one last question around kind of the whole, risk side of EigenLayer and the ecosystem and the different actors in there. So we've seen, a lot of liquid restaking protocols pop up, getting, TVL from stakers by incentivizing them, right, with like additional potential rewards and so on. How do you see that evolving? Because to me, it seems like a very natural fit in the sense that I would, like, my guess is a lot of stakers, like even including myself, like personally, don't have the time or aren't sophisticated enough to go through all the ABSs, really look at every operator, say, okay, how is this operator set up? What's the reputation? What's the selection of ABSs? Do they optimize for a bit more yield and more risk? Do they optimize for less yield and more and less risk? Right? Like it's a very complex process in the end, and kind of having a kind of coordination layer on top of that through an LRT protocol makes inherently a lot of sense to me as an individual. But then you do get a lot of additional risk as well. You kind of have a sort of looping risk there as well with the LRT tokens. And yeah, I would love to hear kind of your take on that part of EigenLayer ecosystem and how you see this kind of evolving.
Yeah, I think LRTs have major benefits, right? So the first is the user experience benefit, which is, hey, I stake and then I let somebody else do all the hard work of risk management. Of course, when you're delegating risk management, if you don't delegate correctly, wisely, then you're in trouble. So that's always, any delegation, real world or internet world, you have to make sure that that's correct. Okay, that's number one. So user experience by the comfort of delegation. The second one is because you get a liquid token as the output rather than a locked asset. You have the benefit of liquidity, and which means something happens, you can just sell the token rather than going to try and unwind your position from EigenLayer and Ethereum. And this is not only a local benefit to the user, this is actually a systemic benefit to liquidity. Systemic benefit is that because you have a liquid token, and let's say you are borrowing against your liquid token USD because you want to pay off your next month's rent, and your position gets liquidated, you don't have to go and withdraw from when some liquidation event happens. If this was not done via liquid token, if this was done via native positions, then you have to go and withdraw your position from EigenLayer, from Ethereum, creating systemic impact for actions that happen at the financial layer. And so liquid restaking tokens kind of buffer the remainder of the system from this risk. I think it's a very important risk, and enough people don't talk about it because they talk about the risks of financialization, but the risk of the benefit of buffering, because if the financialization deals with financialization and the system keeps running as it is, it's a really interesting phenomenon. Okay, that's number two, is the risk buffering. The third one is the cost of capital goes down because I have the liquidity benefits. Now I don't need this layer to earn a 20% APR, a few percent, 3%, 4% is probably good enough in addition to Ethereum's APR. That the fact that there's a liquid representation reduces my cost of doing it. And if I get more rewards, always that's great, but I don't need it to be viable or sustainable. So that, I think, is another major benefit of the LRT. The problems, I already mentioned, delegation risk is, you're giving it to somebody, then you have to make sure that they're doing the right thing. The other one is a lot of people use this now to go and take an LRT and go and borrow, pledge an LRT, get a ETH, and then go and loop it round and round. This is a very, very, very risky strategy. And we've already seen this go wrong with some existing LRTs and LSTs like Lido. This risk is not at all unique to EigenLayer.
Yeah.
Right. This is just you do financially stupid things, you expect financially stupid outcomes, because one of the principles on which the EigenLayer protocol was constructed is to minimize principal risk. The principle is staked on EigenLayer, and yeah, you get a little bit more return or less return. That's okay because you're already getting your staking return. As long as you choose the operator and AVSs wisely, you're not taking a lot of principal risk. But now, it's crypto, so people figure out how to take principal risk by going and looping this thing by saying, oh, I'm going to get like an leveraged rewards, like 20x rewards, but there's a chance you lose your principal. And I think it's just, and people don't understand all the risks. For example, one concrete risk I want to just state here is, imagine that there was some hack in the LRT. Okay. This hack can be fixed by a governance intervention in the LRT. The LRT governance meets and they can just upgrade the contract and fix it. But in the time that this happens, let's say it takes 7 days to do all this stuff. In this 7 days, you think this LRT will be worth 1 ETH all the time? No, people are going to be like, oh, these guys are going to goof up. I'm going to reduce the value. I'm going to sell my LRT. It's going to be like 70% of ETH.
Yeah.
Or maybe 20% of ETH. Who knows, right? So now that is going to lead to, even though once the governance acts and the thing comes back, one LRT may come back to 1 ETH, but temporal volatility is going to be so high, for all kinds of events. Somebody just like, there's a rumor that the LRT is hackable. That's enough to like depeg there.
Yeah.
So this is, looping is not a very safe strategy. Vitalik has talked about don't use leverage, and I'll happily say the same thing too. But, at the end of the day, these are open permissionless systems, and there's very little, we can do except to educate the users about these risks. We wrote a blog post on LRT risks in the EigenLayer blog post, but this is important for people to understand how to use these systems carefully.
Yeah. No, that's very good. So don't use leverage is definitely a good takeaway always. We'll try to link the post as well on LRT risk in kind of the notes to this podcast. I know we're also coming up on time to kind of take away a few things from my end. I mean, obviously, it's the Course One podcast. We're node operators, so we pride ourselves on kind of looking at all the risks that we can see. We have a research team who does also statistical analysis. We did like a simulation and correlation analysis, and trying to just kind of stay, as you mentioned as well, a lot of things are still developing, a lot of things are still early on. The whole system isn't completely working yet. It's like step by step getting to kind of a more full state. And in the meantime, all we can do as node operators is kind of trying to stay on top of these things, and also feedback. So we've given a lot of feedback to different AVSs, and also, our team's interface, right, to try to use our experience as node operators, having run, all kinds of different chains, from fast and powerful stuff like Solana to, more simple Cosmos app chains, and kind of use our expertise and our knowledge that we've gained over the years to kind of help as well, kind of, push things in the right direction. To kind of, end this podcast, and for the last kind of 2 questions that I have, you already mentioned slashing and kind of the economic part of the system going live sometime this year most likely. What is kind of next? What's like the next major focus for EigenLayer beyond that? What's kind of the end game even for EigenLayer? Would love to hear your take on kind of which directions you're thinking, and what's to come.
Yeah. And EigenDA as one of the core utilities of the system, data availability system, we have launched at 10 megabytes per second. The EigenDA system is much higher than anything out there, most other data availability systems. And we have a roadmap to scale this to gigabytes per second. So this is every year we want to do a 10x increase in the throughput. So that's one important direction, because we think the more throughput is available, and also like a roadmap of high throughput inspires developers to come and say, hey, what can I build that I could simply not even consider, right? Like to build on top of a blockchain before. So that's number one on the EigenDA side. On the EigenLayer side, we are trying to make it easier for people to build AVSs. This is a big effort starting now. So, one of the frameworks that, we have at EigenLabs, our COO, Chris Dury, has a lot of experience building complex marketplaces. And one of the things he says is, first, make it possible, then make it easy, then make it scalable. right? So we are at make it possible right now, like barely possible, right? Like slashing and payments are not even live, so it's just barely possible. And then we have to make it easy for people to do it. Once you make it easy for people to do it, a lot of people will do it, and then you have to make it scale. So that's the steps of this like project. So make it easy. We have to do a lot of work to make it easy for AVSs to build on top of EigenLayer. And as a consumer of these AVSs, how do I consume multiple of these AVSs together? That's another thing that we want to make it easy. On the staker side, right now it's all short-term staking and short-term promises. Can I engage in long-term? Because an AVS may want a guarantee that a staker stays for a certain period of time. Can I guarantee long-term staking? And can I pay a little bit more for long-term stakers? So that's called long-term staking. And then we have the full security model, attributable security, all the stuff that I mentioned earlier. We have the full scope of intersubjective forking, how do you build AVSs on top of it, all of that. But a long-term goal is, the EIGEN token white paper we said, towards the open, verifiable digital commons, right? Think of like commons or spaces that we all use, like parks, fishery, all of these things. And, society thrives on commons, right? If you have great commons, then a lot of people can partake in it and then produce more and interesting, useful things. In the digital world, we don't have a powerful system of commons. Our commons is Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Netflix. And these are all like centrally controlled.
Yeah.
Right. And they'll change things based on what is convenient to them rather than what is the necessary for the users. Commons need to be governed, networks need to be governed by the network users, right? So the governed need to govern. And that doesn't exist. So we need to move towards a system of digital commons. And this digital commons should have these two properties of openness, that anybody can come and participate and build and create new things on top, and verifiability, that hey, when I'm interacting with it, it gives me a property that I can actually understand and utilize. So that's our goal, is to take steps towards building the open, verifiable digital commons.
That's awesome. I think that's also, something good to end on. Really appreciate you taking the time and, walking us through a lot of these, quite complex systems in a way that hopefully, a lot of the listeners will understand. So thank you so much for being here today. And,
thank you so much, Yannick. Really enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to many more in the future. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.